Somewhere right now, there is a Bitcoin wallet. It has an address. It has a balance. The balance is zero. It has been zero since the day it was created. Through 2 deadlines, through 62 days of a family's public grief, through 8 named FBI agents and detectives concluding one by one the same thing, a family went on camera and said they would pay. The world watched the wallet. The wallet never moved. And what that means, what 8 law enforcement professionals with careers spanning federal kidnapping investigations, homicide divisions, and forensic analysis have concluded it means is the subject of this video. Not a theory, not speculation. A verdict built piece by piece from the evidence that was always there before the first deadline passed, before the second deadline passed, before anyone was willing to say it out loud. This was not a kidnapping for ransom. Here is what experts say it actually was from the beginning and why the person who took Nancy Guthrie came to her home that night with a motive that had nothing to do with money. Before we examine why 8 named law enforcement professionals have concluded this was never really about ransom and what the actual motive might be based on the operational evidence from that night, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault and have notifications turned on. We bring you expert analysis from former FBI agents, homicide detectives, and forensic specialists who understand what evidence actually means versus what headlines suggest. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button to support investigative coverage that examines real law enforcement conclusions rather than speculation. Drop a comment telling us what you think the actual motive was for taking Nancy Guthrie. Your engagement helps this reach people who might have critical information. And if you know anything about this case, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. Over $1 million in reward money is waiting. Now let's examine why every credentialed expert who has analyzed this case has reached the same conclusion about what this really was and what that tells us about motive. Let's start where every other analysis of this case ends. 8 named law enforcement professionals, former FBI special agents, a retired Pima County homicide detective, a retired SWAT commander, a former state trooper turned unsolved cases expert, have gone on record with essentially the same assessment, not in private, not as anonymous sources, by name, in verified interviews, for named publications. None of them believe this was a kidnapping for ransom in any functional sense. Harry Trombitas, former FBI special agent, told Yahoo News the ransom motive was appearing less and less likely. There's too much involved, Trombitas said. There are too many ways people can get caught. Andrew Bringuel, retired FBI special agent and private security consultant, told Newsweek the evidence points to a kidnapping attempt that went wrong at the point of capture, not a ransom operation conducted to completion. Kurt Dobbs, retired Pima County homicide detective, told Parade this was a kidnapping, not a burglary, not a crime of opportunity, a coordinated operation involving 2 to 4 people, pre-planned, pre-surveilled, with a specific human target. Morgan Wright, 18 years as a state trooper and detective, now CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, told Brian Enton on camera that the case should no longer be treated as a missing person investigation. He used a specific legal term for what he believes it is, a no-body homicide. She went to bed that night like any other night, came home from her kids, maybe a little tired because she's 84, goes to sleep and just didn't lock a door. That's the opportunistic nature of a targeted abduction. These are not bloggers. These are not internet theorists. These are people who have worked federal kidnapping cases, who have sat across tables from ransom kidnappers, who understand the operational mechanics of this kind of crime from the inside. When Harry Trombitas says ransom is appearing less and less likely, that assessment comes from a career of working cases exactly like this one. When Andrew Bringuel draws a parallel to a 1991 Alabama kidnapping, he personally worked as a young agent, a case that began as a ransom operation and ended in homicide before a single dollar moved. He is not theorizing from the outside. He is pattern matching against cases he has lived. When Kurt Dobbs, who spent his career in the same Pima County jurisdiction where this crime occurred, looks at the operational evidence and says 2 to 4 people were involved and this was a kidnapping, he is not guessing. He is reading a crime scene in terrain he has spent decades working. And when people like that say the same thing in public with their names attached, that is not a fringe theory. That is a professional consensus. The question this video is built around is not whether they are right. The question is why. Why do 8 credentialed law enforcement professionals look at the same set of facts the rest of the world has been looking at? The ransom notes, the Bitcoin wallet, the deadlines, the family's public pledge to pay, and conclude that none of it was ever what it appeared to be? The answer begins with understanding exactly how a real ransom kidnapping works and why this case does not fit that model at any point along the chain. A ransom kidnapping, a real one conducted by people who know what they are doing, has a logic to it. That logic is ruthlessly practical, and it requires every moving part to function. The victim must be kept alive, not out of mercy, because a dead victim has no leverage. A dead victim cannot be exchanged for money. The moment the victim dies, the entire mechanism collapses. There is nothing left to sell, no transaction to complete, no way to receive payment without simultaneously handing investigators the evidence that convicts you. A professional ransom operation protects the victim the way a bank protects its vault. The asset is the point. The communication must be managed. You provide proof of life not because you care about the family's feelings, but because proof of life is the only thing that converts a ransom demand into a completed transaction. Without it, no rational person sends money. Without it, the deadline is meaningless. Without it, there is no deal. The transaction itself must be executable. Even with cryptocurrency, even with Bitcoin, which some criminals mistakenly believe is untraceable, the mechanics of receiving, holding, and converting funds without exposure require planning. Blockchain forensics firms can track wallet activity in real time. Law enforcement has tools that map cryptocurrency flows. The FBI, working with firms that specialize in blockchain forensics, has cracked far more sophisticated operations than a single Bitcoin wallet address sent to a television network. The idea that demanding Bitcoin makes a ransom untraceable is, in the words of one forensics expert, a common misconception. Bitcoin transactions are recorded on a public ledger. Every movement is visible. Every wallet has a history, and the exit must be planned. If you hold someone for ransom and collect the money, you now have a witness who can identify you, describe where they were held, and lead investigators back to everyone involved. The return of the victim or the decision not to return them is the most dangerous moment in any ransom operation. It requires a plan for what happens after the money moves. Real ransom kidnappings in the United States are vanishingly rare precisely because all of these requirements are so difficult to execute simultaneously. Harry Trombitas confirmed this to Yahoo News. Kidnapping for ransom has really decreased over the years. The infrastructure it demands, the secure location, the communication management, the financial architecture, the exit strategy, puts it beyond the operational capacity of most criminals. Andrew Bringuel, drawing on his own career in the FBI, brought a specific historical comparison to his analysis of this case. He told Newsweek that the Nancy Guthrie case reminded him of the 1991 kidnapping of Carrie Lawson, a young Alabama attorney abducted by a man named Jerry Bland who had initially planned a ransom operation. In that case, the ransom mechanism appeared intact at first. There was communication, there was a demand, there was an expectation of payment, and then before any transaction could be completed, Bland killed Lawson, disposed of her body, and took his own life. The case was solved, the money never moved, and Carrie Lawson was never recovered. Bringuel said it directly. In that case, and perhaps this one, it began as a traditional kidnapping for ransom. Began, past tense. A plan that started in one place and ended somewhere entirely different because the victim did not survive the execution of the first step. Now hold that framework in your mind. Hold what a real ransom kidnapping requires and what happens when the thing that makes it possible disappears. And then look at what actually happened in Tucson, Arizona on the night of January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had back pain severe enough that walking to her mailbox was an effort. She had a documented heart condition. She used a pacemaker and took daily medication that her physician and Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed was critical to her survival. Missing doses was not a manageable inconvenience. It was, in the sheriff's own words, potentially fatal. She was last seen alive on the evening of January 31st, when her son-in-law dropped her off at her home in Tucson's Catalina Foothills neighborhood shortly before 10 p.m. Her garage door closed at approximately 9:50 p.m. At that moment, the clock that this case has always really been about began running. What CBS News confirmed through law enforcement sources is this. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, Nancy's doorbell camera was disconnected. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker app lost its connection to her cell phone. 41 minutes. That is the window. The camera goes dark, and 41 minutes later, the device monitoring the beating of an 84-year-old woman's heart goes silent. Think about what a pacemaker app disconnecting from a phone actually means in the context of a kidnapping. It means one of three things. Nancy's phone was taken from her reach, or Nancy was moved beyond Bluetooth or cellular range, or Nancy's heart stopped sending a signal worth receiving. In any of those scenarios, the ransom logic is already broken. You cannot manage a negotiation for a woman whose pacemaker went offline in the middle of the night. You cannot provide proof of life when you have lost the medical thread that tells you whether there is still a life to prove. That 2:28 a.m. timestamp is the moment the ransom theory, if it was ever real, died. Not weeks later when deadlines passed. Not on day 62 when the wallet was still at zero. At 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, while the family slept, before the world knew anything had happened, the mechanism that a ransom operation depends on went silent. Everything that came after, the notes, the wallet, the deadlines, was built on top of that silence. And silence in the logic of ransom means the deal was never going to close. The Bitcoin wallet was watched by the entire world. TMZ received the original ransom note. The note contained a specific cryptocurrency wallet address. TMZ verified the address was real and began monitoring it publicly. The demand was for millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The first deadline was set for 5:09 p.m. on Thursday, February 5th. A second deadline, a contingency, was built into the same note. Monday, February 9th. The Guthrie family went on Instagram. Savannah and her siblings Cameron and Annie addressed the people who had taken their mother directly. "We received your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so we can celebrate with her. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay. We are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk." Those words are a public commitment to a transaction. They were watched by millions of people. The first deadline passed. The wallet sat at zero. The second deadline passed. The wallet sat at zero. Through the first month of the investigation, zero. Through day 62, when ongoing monitoring confirmed the cryptocurrency wallet connected to the original ransom demand had never received a confirmed payment, zero. Here is the question that the ransom theory cannot answer. If the people who took Nancy Guthrie actually wanted money, why did they never give the family a way to pay them? No proof of life. The family asked for it publicly, desperately, directly. None was provided. Law enforcement protocol is explicit on this point. You do not transfer ransom funds without proof of life. Not because of stubbornness, because providing proof of life is the only thing that keeps the negotiation alive. Proof of life is the currency of every ransom operation, the thing the kidnapper trades for the right to collect. Without it, the Guthrie family could not pay even if they had the cash ready and waiting. And they did. They said so on camera. Harry Trombitas pointed to this gap directly when speaking to Yahoo News. If the notes were real, if the family was willing, if investigators were engaged, then the absence of any proof of life, any communication that allowed a transaction to proceed, points to one of two conclusions. The people behind those notes either could not provide proof of life because they no longer had a living person to prove, or they were never connected to Nancy at all. Both conclusions mean the same thing for the ransom theory. It was never going anywhere. The wallet was always going to be zero. Subscribe to True Crime Vault and turn on all notifications for continued analysis of Nancy Guthrie's case. Like this video to support coverage that examines what law enforcement experts actually conclude versus what speculation suggests. Share this video because someone might have information about the real motive behind Nancy's abduction. Comment with your thoughts on why you think someone targeted Nancy if it wasn't really about ransom. Visit our channel for comprehensive coverage of every development. And if you have any information, contact FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. The reward is over $1 million waiting for information that leads to answers. The man on the porch was carrying a full backpack, not a bag to put things in on the way out. A full backpack brought from wherever he came from, carried to the front door of an 84-year-old woman's house at 2 in the morning. Retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dobbs, who spent his career in the same jurisdiction where this crime occurred, told Parade, "Burglars don't go to burglarize a house with a full backpack. This was a kidnapping." Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers, also speaking to Parade, put it this way, "I have never thought this was a robbery gone wrong. There were too many opportunities to have hit the house when nobody was home. Professional burglars case properties to find windows when residents are absent. They do not arrive at a home at 2 a.m. when the resident is almost certainly inside and asleep. That is not how burglary works. That is how abduction works. You come when the target is home because the target is the point." But the backpack is not the most important thing he brought with him. He had been to the property before. Long before February 1st, the same masked figure or someone working alongside him had been captured on Nancy's security camera at the front door weeks earlier. Not entering, not causing a scene, just appearing at the door, appearing to locate the camera, and leaving. Law enforcement calls this reconnaissance. Retired SWAT Commander Bob Cleary, speaking to Parade, described a vacant property near Nancy's home that had gone empty before her disappearance, a property he flagged as a possible staging location, a base of operations from which the suspects could monitor Nancy's comings and goings and learn her schedule. It would provide them a cover story to be at those locations at different times, Cleary said. Investigative journalist Brian Enton, who spent more than 40 days embedded in that neighborhood, noted something that has not gotten the attention it deserves. Even after 6 weeks on site, he still used GPS to navigate to Nancy's home. The Catalina foothills at night are disorienting. Quiet residential streets winding through desert terrain with no obvious landmarks. Whoever came to Nancy's door in the early morning hours of February 1st navigated that terrain in the dark without hesitation. They knew exactly where they were going because they had been there before. That level of preparation, the prior visits, the staging location, the navigational familiarity, the reconnaissance of the camera positions, does not describe a ransom kidnapping of opportunity. It describes an operation built around a specific target, planned over time, executed by multiple people who divided the logistics among themselves. Dobbs told Parade he believed the operation required 2 to 4 people. The logistics of something of this magnitude is too much for one person to handle, in my professional opinion, based on the facts as I know them right now. 2 to 4 people. Weeks of preparation. A specific target. A backpack full of equipment brought to the scene. Whatever the motive behind this operation was, it was not spontaneous. It was not opportunistic. It was constructed. And the people who built it knew from the beginning exactly who they were coming for and why. There is one detail about Nancy Guthrie's home that has not received the weight it deserves in the public conversation about this case. Her front security gate. NewsNation reported in March that investigators examining the home's layout reached a specific conclusion. The gate at Nancy's front door was nearly impossible to breach from the outside. You cannot force it open. You cannot bypass it from the street. For the masked individual captured on the front porch camera to have gotten Nancy through that gate and out of the home, someone on the inside would have needed to open it, or it was already open. That architectural fact produced a specific investigative theory confirmed to NewsNation by law enforcement sources. The individual at the front door was not alone. There was a second person already inside the home. The masked figure at the door was the visible element of the operation, the one the camera caught. The inside person was the one the camera never saw. This was not one person who knocked on a door and forced his way in. This was a coordinated 2-point entry with at least one participant already positioned inside before the operation went active. The logistics of achieving that, getting someone inside Nancy's home before the operation began without alerting her or her family, require planning that goes far beyond what a ransom kidnapping of impulse looks like. It requires access. It requires either a deception that got someone through her door before that night or a vulnerability in the home's entry points that had been identified during those weeks of prior reconnaissance and exploited in a way that has not yet been publicly explained. And it raises a question that the investigation has not publicly resolved. If someone was already inside Nancy's home before the masked individual appeared on the front porch, who was it? How did they get there? And how long had they been waiting? Blood was confirmed at Nancy's home. Confirmed to be hers, found on the front door, on the porch, and on the driveway. Investigators did not characterize the scene as showing signs of a major physical struggle in the formal sense. No overturned furniture, no extended confrontation indicators. What the scene showed was blood. And retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, analyzing the available evidence for News Nation, explained why that distinction matters more than it first appears. Her analysis focused on what was not there: voids. In blood spatter analysis, when a person moves through a pattern, walking, stepping, any ambulatory movement, their body interrupts the pattern and leaves gaps. Those gaps are called voids. They are how forensic analysts reconstruct whether and how a person moved through a scene. O'Connell did not find voids consistent with someone walking out. "I doubt that she walked out," she said. "Blood is concentrated here, but the sphere is this big, it's around. You would have a void here from one foot or from another foot or from something there. There don't appear to be any voids," which is another reason why that mat out in front would have been so important to take. Because there were no voids. Her conclusion: "In my mind, she's wrapped up in something and they're carrying her out." Nancy Guthrie was carried from her own home. The absence of voids also tells a secondary story. If Nancy had been ambulatory, if she had walked out even under duress, even with someone beside her, there would be interruptions in the pattern. Her footsteps, her gait, the natural movement of a human body through space, leaves a forensic trace in blood. The absence of that trace means she was not upright and mobile. She was horizontal or incapacitated or both. She was wrapped, according to O'Connell's analysis, and carried by someone through the front door she could not have opened from outside, onto the porch where the blood was, down the driveway and into whatever came next. Andrew Bringuel, the retired FBI special agent who now runs a private security consulting firm in New York, had already constructed the operational picture that O'Connell's forensics confirm. Speaking to Newsweek, Bringuel concluded that the intent was capture, not murder. If his intent was to murder her, he could have done so with the weapon on his person. The masked individual at Nancy's door was armed. He had a weapon. He did not use it to kill her. He used it to take her. But something went wrong between the intent and the outcome. Without knowing if anything of value was indeed stolen, my opinion is the subject's intent was to kidnap Mrs. Guthrie, but something went wrong. Violence took place and she was injured but not killed, Bringuel told Newsweek. And then the line that contains everything: "I think he underestimated Mrs. Guthrie, and if she resisted, he hurt her." How badly, in her compromised state, may have led to tragic consequences the subject didn't plan. An 84-year-old woman with back pain, a pacemaker, and a heart condition resisted. The plan cracked at the point of contact. And in the gap between what they planned and what happened, the blood on the porch, the pacemaker going dark at 2:28 in the morning, the wallet that would never move, is where the ransom theory finally completely collapses. By the time the ransom notes arrived, the crime had already happened. Think about the sequence. Nancy disappears on the night of January 31st. The pacemaker goes dark at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. The notes demanding Bitcoin, setting deadlines, threatening consequences, begin arriving in the days that follow. Those notes did not cause the abduction. They followed it. Whatever happened in that home in the 41 minutes between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning happened before any note was written, before any deadline was set, before the wallet address was ever created. Savannah Guthrie confirmed on Today that most of the notes her family received were fake, the product of opportunists attaching themselves to a high-profile case. The two notes that we received that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real. One person, a California man named Derek Kayla, was arrested for sending fraudulent ransom communications that had no connection to the actual crime. Former law enforcement detective Morgan Wright characterized these kinds of parasitic communications as a predictable feature of any high-profile missing persons case. They flood the investigation, they consume resources, they create noise around what the evidence is actually saying. But even the notes Savannah believed were real. The two she told Today she tended to think were genuine, the ones the family responded to, produced nothing. No proof of life, no confirmation, no transaction. The family asked for evidence that Nancy was alive. None came. They waited through the first deadline and the second and heard nothing that allowed them to act. An unverified report discussed on the Megyn Kelly Show on March 28th, but not confirmed by the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department, described a second communication that was not a ransom demand, but an apology. A message allegedly stating that Nancy had died of a cardiac event during her captivity, that her medical condition had proved more serious than the senders anticipated. That report has not been authenticated by any law enforcement body, but if it is even partially accurate, it maps precisely onto what Bringuel theorized weeks earlier, a plan that broke at the point of contact, consequences that exceeded what was intended, a mechanism that could never be completed because the asset it depended on was gone. The notes were either from people who had already lost what they needed to complete the transaction, or from people who had nothing to do with the actual crime. In either case, they were never the center of this story. The center of this story was always what happened in that home between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. There is a layer to this analysis that sits not with the suspects but with the investigation itself, and it has been signaling the same conclusion as the experts. When Sheriff Nanos appeared at press conferences throughout February and March, he said investigators believed they knew why Nancy's home was targeted, that it was targeted, but he declined to say more. That kind of deliberate withholding, confirming that motive is answerable while refusing to name it, is a specific investigative posture. It is not the posture of a department that is lost. It is the posture of a department that is protecting information relevant to an active prosecution. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Kidnapper raised a question publicly that other investigators had been asking privately. Why had the Pima County Sheriff's Department declined the offers of established professional search organizations to help search the surrounding terrain? Groups like EchoSearch and the United Cajun Navy, organizations that specialize in precisely the kind of systematic terrain search that Morgan Wright said the case now requires, had publicly offered their services. The department had not accepted. Kidnapper's hypothesis was pointed. Is law enforcement close to an arrest and they know what happened to Nancy, so they don't want to waste the valuable resources of these groups? It is worth sitting with that hypothesis. If investigators are operating on an internal framework that has already shifted from missing person to no-body homicide, if they already have information that tells them what they are looking for is not a living person but concealed remains, then deploying organizations whose methodology is built for finding living people in distress would be, from an investigative standpoint, misdirected. It would not find what they are actually looking for, and it would confirm publicly, before law enforcement is ready to confirm it, what the internal working theory has become. Retired FBI Special Agent Steve Moore, speaking to Parade, described the psychology of federal investigators on cases like this one. Cases like this were never put down. One of the hard things when you're an agent working on these things is forcing yourself to go home and go to sleep, and you wake up in the middle of the night saying, "What am I doing here? I better get back to work." Someone planned this. Someone executed it. Someone knows exactly what happened in those 41 minutes. And cases built on that kind of premeditation, cases with witnesses, with accomplices, with reconnaissance trails and backpack purchases and DNA and surveillance footage do not stay unsolved forever. So, if this was not a kidnapping for ransom, what was it? Morgan Wright, on Brian Entin, investigates on March 19th, the 47th day of the search, said the quiet part out loud with the precision of someone who had spent 18 years in law enforcement and was no longer willing to watch the wrong framework consume the investigation. It's not a burglary gone wrong. It's a targeted abduction gone wrong. If it was truly a burglar in there only to take stuff, I would expect to see signs of theft, signs of burglary, not a staged crime scene. If she dies, then that's why I say, treat it as a no-body homicide. Read that carefully. Wright is not saying the ransom motive was wrong. He is saying the ransom was the mechanism, not the reason. The reason someone abducts a person is to have leverage. The mechanism by which they intended to convert that leverage into an outcome was a ransom demand. But the mechanism requires the target to be alive. When the mechanism fails, when the target does not survive the abduction, you are no longer looking at a ransom kidnapping. You are looking at a targeted abduction gone wrong. A no-body homicide is a legal framework, one that the FBI's own law enforcement bulletin notes almost always begins as a missing person case. It is the framework that tells investigators they are not searching for someone who is lost. They are searching for evidence of a crime whose central piece of evidence has been concealed. When we have a no-body homicide, Wright said, we're looking for clandestine grave sites. Open grave sites, concealed grave sites, things that when you're out walking in the foothills, you need to be looking for these kinds of things. That shift changes everything about how you search, where you search, and what you tell the public to look for. Wright also identified the reason the suspects, if they had indeed lost Nancy during the abduction, would not have attempted to communicate further. He told front-page detectives that doing so would have dramatically elevated their legal exposure from kidnapping to felony murder. The calculus of a criminal who has already caused the death of a victim is stark. Silence and concealment carry a lower charge risk than communication and acknowledgement. So they go dark. The wallet stays at zero. The deadlines pass without contact. The proof of life that never came was not a negotiating tactic. It was an impossibility. Harry Trombitas, when pressed by Yahoo News on what the actual motive might be, was specific. It could be for revenge of some type, anger, or it could be for a third purpose that we're just not even aware of. Revenge, personal grievance, a reason that predated the ransom demand. That may have motivated the abduction regardless of whether a ransom transaction was ever realistically expected to occur. The sophistication of this operation, the weeks of reconnaissance, the inside access, the coordinated participants, the ability to navigate an unfamiliar desert neighborhood in complete darkness, does not belong to someone who grabbed an opportunity. It belongs to someone who had a reason specific enough to justify weeks of planning, a reason personal enough to make a specific elderly woman in a specific house, in a specific neighborhood in Tucson the target, and not someone else. Sheriff Nanos has said publicly that investigators believe they know why Nancy's home was targeted. He has not said more than that, but the fact that law enforcement believes the why is answerable, that this was not random, not arbitrary, points toward exactly the kind of motive Wright and Trombitas are describing. Something personal, something directed, something that existed before the first ransom note was ever written. And if that is true, if the motive was not money but something older and more specific, then the ransom demand was never going to succeed. Not because the family wouldn't pay, because the people who came to Nancy Guthrie's home that night were never really there for the money. On March 23, 2026, 51 days after Nancy disappeared, the Guthrie siblings posted a statement to Instagram. They did not say they were still searching. They did not say they were waiting for the investigation to break. They said they wanted to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but that they could not do so until she is brought to a final resting place. Not until she is found. Not until she comes home. Until she is brought to a final resting place. That language is specific, deliberate. In grief, people reach for the words that match where they actually are, not where they want to appear to be, not the optimistic performance for a watching world, but the thing that is truest at 3 in the morning when no one is watching. The Guthrie siblings chose the language of completion, of laying down, of a chapter that is already closed somewhere in ways the physical world has not yet confirmed. 3 days later, Savannah sat across from Hoda Kotb Today for her first public interview since her mother vanished. She talked about the morning she learned her mother was gone. She talked about the blood on the front step and the Ring camera yanked from the wall. She talked about waking up every night in the dark and imagining what her mother went through. She said, "And in the darkness I imagine her terror, and it is unthinkable, but those thoughts demand to be thought." And then she described a moment of prayer, of telling God she could handle anything except not knowing. And she said this, "Whether she's on this earth still, or whether she's in heaven, I know where she is. I know who she's with, but we need to know." There is a grammar to grief that people at different stages of it use without always realizing it. There is the grammar of hope, active, forward-facing, reaching for something not yet confirmed. And there is the grammar of private knowledge, a peace that has already arrived somewhere even when the public facts have not caught up to it. Savannah did not say she hoped her mother was somewhere safe. She said she knew. That single word carries the weight of every private briefing, every careful conversation with the FBI task force, everything that a family is told in confidence that the public is not yet ready to hear. She knows. She just needs the world to know too. She needs the physical confirmation, the location, the name, the arrest that would allow her family to do what the Instagram statement said they want to do: celebrate and lay Nancy to rest. She announced she is returning to Today on April 6th. She called it her purpose right now. Savannah Guthrie has been one of the most prominent faces of American morning television for years. To step back into that world, the cheerful interviews, the light segments, the relentless optimism of morning broadcast after what her family has lived through for 2 months, requires a kind of compartmentalization that most people will never be asked to perform. She is doing it not because she has moved on. She is doing it because staying visible, staying in front of the public, keeping the name Nancy Guthrie in the national conversation, that is now her strategy. Keep talking, keep showing up, keep the pressure on whoever is out there who knows something. 8 named law enforcement professionals. Weeks of reconnaissance. A pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 in the morning. A wallet that collected nothing through 62 days of the world watching it. A family that stopped asking to get their mother back and started asking to bring her home. The story was never really about the ransom. It was about what happened before the first note was written, in the dark, in the 41 minutes between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. That is where the truth of this case lives. And the people who know exactly what happened in those 41 minutes are still out there. If you have any information at all, any detail that might be connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. The FBI line is 1-800-CALL FBI. The Guthrie family is offering a $1 million reward. The FBI is offering $100,000 for information leading to her recovery or the arrest of anyone involved. Someone out there knows something. The question is whether they are willing to say it. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She deserved to go to sleep safely in her own home. She deserved to wake up the next morning. She deserves justice. And the motive for why someone took her that night, whether revenge, anger, or something we're not yet aware of, that motive matters because it leads to who, and who leads to where Nancy is. The investigation is not over. Neither is our coverage.